Hey everybody, today I'm going to be reviewing Do the Right Thing, which is a film that came out in 1989. It was written and directed by Spike Lee. This movie has been on my mind a lot lately with the election coming up very soon. And with just, how divided our nation is, most of it because of racism. So I felt like revisiting this film for the first time in a long time. This movie is a really personal film for Spike Lee, and he made it pretty early on in his career for sure. And it has been, hailed as this great masterpiece of American cinema. And I think that is for very good reason. I think that this film it's just very special. It is one of my favorite films as well. I think it has this vibrancy about it, this energy that just stood out from everything that was coming out at the time. Spike Lee is a very infamous director. I mean, he does have a tendency to insert his foot in his mouth oftentimes, but every time I watch his films, the good ones, like, this film, 25th Hour, also one of my all-time, like, top 10 favorite movies of all time, it reminds me that he is very daring, very smart, a very confident director, that's obvious. But he's just so dynamic as a visionary, and even though sometimes that can be downplayed by, his persona, I still think that his legacy will be his films. Spike Lee grew up in Brooklyn, and the film takes place in Brooklyn. Because of that, obviously there's a lot of authenticity that Spike really understands. The characters, the vernacular, the humor, the grit, it all feels so vital, so real. It's a very aggressive, very staccato film that is it's drenched in like this hip-hop urban influence. And I think that's really exciting. I mean, I know obviously there's always going to be detractors, and there are a few. Some people think that Spike Lee's style is a little bit too conscious. It's something that he's too self-aware of and it becomes gimmicky. But I really disagree with that. I can see how maybe certain films of his can be gimmicky in terms of just the very jarring nature of the style, but not this one. This movie is a very complex portrait of racism, politics, social structure in America at the time, and kind of the bombastic style of the film to me matches just all of that heightened anger and the depiction of culture in film. And it's full of creative shots and images, and I defy you to find a shot in this movie that isn't interesting. This movie takes place on the hottest day of the summer, where tensions and frustrations are already very high, and the heat just, only adds to that tension. And really what you're seeing here throughout the movie is just kind of a series of characters interacting as the violence and the hatred start to escalate throughout the neighborhood. What you're seeing in terms of the character archetypes and just kind of a consistent theme that's running through them is this sense of entitlement. And Spike Lee, actually, he stars in the film as well. He plays Mookie, who is, this young guy who's got a son, and he works at just a pizza place. Sal is the owner of the pizza place, and he feels like a very disenfranchised Italian immigrant trying to make it in New York City. He built this pizza shop with his own two hands, as he says, and because he's having to take orders from customers in a predominantly African-American neighborhood, he kind of resents that, and he starts to feel major disdain for African Americans. You've got Mother Sister and the Mayor, both representing kind of the older generation, and even though the two characters disagree with each other on a lot of things, what they have in common is this sense of like jadedness and bitterness from old age, yet perseverance and this level of perspective that other characters in the film do not have. They don't have that perspective on life, and I think that's why those two characters add a different layer and a different aspect to the film that we just wouldn't get otherwise. Anyone who feels out of control or, just out of their element in some way in their environment immediately becomes defensive against anyone who contributes to that change. And while this may be kind of a typical trait of humans in general, what makes the film special is how it uses that as the center of the film, and yet it shows the characters in a very complex way. You see a lot of weaknesses in the characters, but you also see a lot of strengths as well. Sal, for instance, I think he's a great character, so I'd like to use him as a great example, but obviously he's racist. Obviously he's very angry because he's worked so hard and he feels like this is what I have to show for it, sort of thing. But he's got a sense of humanity in him as well. He is a family man. His family means a lot to him, his sons who work with him. And he has a bit of a crush on Mookie's sister, and obviously Mookie is African American, as is his sister. So it's those conflicting ideals of kind of what he thinks he should feel and how he really feels, which I think is kind of a cool thing to bring up. And despite the irritability between Mookie and himself, there is a sense of mutual admiration there. Even if they don't ever really bring it up, you can tell that it's there. They share this common ground of familiarity, and they both, in a way, understand what it's like to be disenfranchised. And I think that's kind of why they work together. There is a wonderful scene at the end, their last interaction, that I just think is so perfect. After all that happens, the two of them still have that sense of humanity that they share for each other. There are so many interesting emblems, so many interesting images and quotes in the movie that are iconic. Obviously, one of the more famous ones would be the character of Radio Raheem, who is that kind of representation of standing for your culture and your rights against adversity. And then you've got characters like Buggin' Out, shout out to Giancarlo Esposito from Breaking Bad. He is very similar to Radio Raheem, but I think he handles it in a much more kind of immature sort of way. But one of my favorite emblems in the form of a character would be Smiley, actually. And he is a stutterer who has, like, you know, some sort of mental retardation. He goes around the neighborhood trying to sell pictures. He's got a picture of Martin Luther King, and he's got a picture of Malcolm X, and people just kind of dismiss him. No one really buys the pictures. He's always kind of lurking in the background of the film. You can see him through the glass of, like, Sal's Pizzeria, and you see him just kind of walking. He's always there. And he is kind of that representation of the film's core themes of just kind of, you know, confliction, just the sense of dividedness, yet standing for those rights in different ways in a very prejudiced world. He's also racially ambiguous, at least he looks that way. And I don't know if that was a conscious decision or not, but in my mind, it kind of adds to that kind of metaphor for the fact that he's always right in the middle of the things. He's never on any side. That is until the end of the movie, then things change. And I just find him to be the moral center of the whole piece. The idea that doing the right thing is often something that most people around him don't want to do. But he really can't speak about that, what doing the right thing is, or speaking about the beliefs, standing against racism, because he has that stutter, so he can't express himself. And even if he could, who would listen to him? All of these characters come together in the big climax of the film, which is the big riot at the end. And I mean, I've seen this movie quite a few times, but this last time I watched it, man, it is a powerful, very intense sequence. Just the images and the pain and how it represents, you see so much imagery that reminds us of the civil rights movement in the 60s, all of the protests. And then obviously now, I mean, it reminds us of all the protests going on in 2016. What happens in that sequence is tragic, it's shocking, it's brutal, and yet the sun shines the next day and life moves on. And really everyone's just left to kind of make sense of things. There's no neat and tidy solution to this. And I think that's why this movie is so powerful. It resonates with people because of how it handles every idea and every character archetype with such detail and such care. This movie is ballsy and it makes no apologies, and I love that it's so blatant, because when you're trying to tackle situations like this and you're trying to unite people, sometimes you do need to be very in your face in order to make that point come across. And because these are such important issues, I think they deserve to be handled in such a manner. And again, because it's such a realistic portrait in some ways, and I mean, it's obviously very exaggerated and very artistic film, but the fact that everything does feel so real in terms of the ideas and the characters and the layers of it really is what's so important about it. It doesn't glorify anything. When you start glorifying something, that's when the point gets lost. And yes, I do think that this is the perfect film to watch right now. Really anytime, but now is pivotal. Just because, again, it's a crucial time in our world, in our history. And to me, that's what good art does. When you see a great film or whatever you're doing that's artistic and you're inspired by it, and it allows you to see maybe a perspective on life, it allows you to look at life in a way that you weren't used to. That is very powerful, and maybe it can change you. Maybe it can help you be a better person, and we need that. And that is my review. Thank you all for listening. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, the link is below, and you can also like my Facebook page in the link below that. Catch you next time.